Welcome to another edition of Stand Alone, where we go from being ordinary to extraordinary. What I really want to talk about is something that's very near and dear to me, which is leadership. And when I think about people around the world that understand what it really takes, it's not an easy role that is something that we dive into a whole lot because it's hard to explain what really makes a phenomenal leader. And to live an extraordinary life, one thing that we can say is that we have to first learn how to lead ourselves. In today's world, there's a lot of voices, but we have to zone in and listen to the right voices and tune out the noise. And so today, I have a very, very special guest with us, Dr. Steven Stein. Your credentials are so extraordinary, but you've built up, 40 years of science to back up what it really takes to be successful. And when we talk about leadership, which we're going to dive into a whole lot today, your resume and just your credentials are so extraordinary. A leading expert on psychological assessment and emotional intelligence, which I really want to talk about today. This is a big deal. You've worked with the U.S. Air Force, the Army, the Navy, Special Units, the Pentagon, FBI Academy, American Express, Air Canada, professional sports teams. As I was doing the research on you, it says that you worked with like the Real Housewives of Toronto. I was born in Toronto. I didn't know there was a Real Housewives of Toronto. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit too. But I'm sure you've met some personalities along your way in your career. But you have some amazing books that you've authored, and we're going to talk about hardiness, what that is, making stress work for you. You've written a lot on emotional intelligence for dummies, the EQ Edge, and all of these you can get on Amazon. And I would just tell our audience, which is a lot of top achievers, high performers. One of the skill sets that I see lacking in people today that is so absolutely necessary is communication skills and your ability to like emotionally connect with people. And in the world of AI, this is how I wanted to like start off our conversation, Dr. Stein. In the world where we kind of live under this threat of like the robots are taking over, we have to sit down with ourselves, look inward, and say, well, how am I going to overcome? What is my edge? What can I bring to the table? What can never be replicated in people's experience in dealing with me as a human being? And then get really, really good at that. So I just want to say, welcome. Thank you for being here. And what made you first really dive into understanding emotional intelligence? 20, 40 years ago when this wasn't a popular term and nobody was really talking about this, and you're the pioneer of this. So what made you understand this and seek out this knowledge?
Well, thanks for having me, Sabrina. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah.
You're right. We started a long time ago, and when I started this, as you alluded to, my company started about 40 years ago, and a lot of what we did originally was evolving around psychological assessment and looking at problems that people were having, specifically kids. We were pioneering the area of ADHD. We were looking at depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. So we were measuring a lot of elements of people who were having difficulties in life, a lot of challenges. And I reached a point in the late 1980s, early 1990, where I thought, we spent so much time and effort on what's wrong with people, and not just myself, as psychologists generally. Why don't we start looking at what's right with people? What makes people succeed? Why are some people so successful in life, even though they've gone through incredible challenges, but they turn out really doing amazing things? So that's when, and around that same time, positive psychology started to become a thing. And I connected with the pioneers of emotional intelligence before Dan Goleman's book actually came out. And we were starting to research that at that point in time. So the whole idea was trying to find people who were really successful in life and did well, and contrast that to people who were struggling in life, who were not doing well. And I spent a lot of time at both ends of the spectrum. I was working with homeless people,
Wow.
with women who were battered in their relationships. We had looked at people with critical illnesses who just weren't doing well. So we looked at poverty, a lot of areas where people were struggling. And then I looked at very successful people, professional athletes, CEOs who were very successful, salespeople who were top salespeople, top lawyers, and a variety of professions. And we started trying to tease out what are the factors that differentiate these two groups. And that's what brought us to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and as a business owner, someone that does a lot of hiring, does a lot of training, these are things that we're constantly looking for in people. These are like qualities that we would just love if we could get, a checklist and ask people direct questions and say, do you have this quality? Do you have this quality? And I want us to get into this because when you talk about hardiness and people dealing with stress today, I would say that for the majority of people, I don't think we're getting better at dealing with stress. Something's happening. And I would like to hear your, just your thoughts on like exactly what is hardiness. And we'll talk about that when we break down commitment, control, and challenge. But if you can quickly make people understand like what is hardiness and how does it relate to stressful environments that we find ourselves in today?
Sure. And you pointed out something important that, we have so much more knowledge and research today than we ever had, and yet the stress levels go up. When we do
Yeah.
surveys, we see incredible numbers. We recently did a survey across campuses in the US, and we found that something like 40% of students are experiencing high levels of anxiety, which is really incredible, in today's day and age. So the concept of hardiness originated by my co-author, Dr. Paul Bartone, who spent most of his career in the U.S. Army. He was retired as Army colonel, taught at West Point, and was leading research in this area of hardiness, and did a lot of work starting about 20 or 25 years ago, again, looking at what made people successful or get through stressful situations and what differentiated the ones who did that well versus those who floundered, who weren't able to do it well. And I think the first study that led to this concept of hardiness had to do with the telecom industry, where there was a takeover, and senior people were losing their jobs as a result of this takeover. And what they were doing, this was in the middle of a study where they were just looking at stress and executives and how they deal with stress. And what happened was some of those executives who lost their jobs did what you would expect. They were angry, they were depressed, they wanted to fight back and do all kinds of things that really weren't helpful. And there was a small group, maybe 10% of them, who had a completely different approach to this situation. In their case, they said, well, maybe this is an opportunity for me. Maybe I could go open that bakery I always wanted to run, or I could go work for some other company that I was kind of interested in. So there was a complete difference in these two groups. And that led to this whole concept of hardiness when they continued doing the research and again finding out what it was. And it was a mindset. We come into our work with a certain mindset, a way of thinking. And the three C's that you outlined, commitment, control, and challenge, were really the key components of that mindset that differentiated those who succeeded in challenging situations versus those who struggled.
Yeah. And so at the beginning of the book, you talk about two people that can undergo the same event, right? And someone, it's just like what you're saying, someone is unscathed by it, and then someone, is just overwhelmed by it. And when you look at today and we talk about health, right? Everyone is more in tune with their health, I think, than ever before. But that doesn't mean we're getting healthier. We're more in tune with like what the idea of emotional intelligence is, but I find people to still not be emotionally stable. And so if we can like peel this back, because you started to say that you worked with children. And I just want to know, like, is there something that we could do when our children are young to prepare them to be more hardy so that when they go to school, the pressures don't collapse them? When they have like jobs that don't come, don't go the way they planned, it doesn't collapse them, but they learn to adapt, they learn to change. What could we do in the younger years? Because often when I look at people and I'm training them, there's so much that I have to go and undo from like childhood. And So I want to know, as a mother of three small children, what can I do to help them out and give them an edge so they're more hardy as they age and give them an advantage?
Yeah, well, one thing is really fostering responsibility in our
Okay.
kids, independence. A lot of times, we have parents who are really not letting our kids be kids, sort of hovering over and micromanaging what they do. So it's really important for kids to have trial and error, to experiment, to try things, and to often we learn by experience. It's great that we give guidance and we're authoritative in what we teach our kids, but we can't be authoritarian in trying to just order them to do things without any kind of understanding or explanation. So fostering this independence, we're finding that kids today are growing up so much more fragile than we were in our generation, or even some of the Gen Xers were. And it's because they really haven't had those opportunities to take responsibility, to fail, to try trial and error. We've been really overprotective with our kids for a long period of time. So that's one big thing that I think is pretty important with our kids. Another influence today, by the way, is social media, and that hasn't been a great influence. That's really it hasn't done good things for our kids in many ways, and we
What
have to really.
specifically is it doing wrong for
Well,
children?
it's taking away some of the social interaction that some of us had growing up, right? Well, we would play on the street with kids, whether it was street hockey or whatever it was, and we'd get into altercations and we'd deal with it, in person. We'd learn how to negotiate, argue, get through situations, and then be friends at the end. Social media, it takes that away. Your interactions aren't real. And you're hiding behind your phone and your emails and your chats, and it's not the same kind of interaction. They're not doing an emotional intelligence. We want to read faces. We want to see what's going on, to understand people better. And we're losing that. There's been a lot of research by Jonathan Haidt and his group showing on some of the harm that social media has been doing to our kids in terms of interfering with their interpersonal interactions.
Yeah, I wanted to spend some time going over these three C's, and it reminds me of what you're saying and what you said in the book about commitment. And for a lot of people today, Dr. Stein, most people aren't even capable of committing to a place of work, right? They're looking for the next best opportunity, and then they're not really diving into like the deep work, the level of commitment that's required to do very well over long periods of time. You've spent decades researching what you've researched to be an expert, and I just think about people today that are doing something for a year and they're like, this isn't for me. I'm going to do something else. This isn't for me. And when you talked about commitment, I loved that you said that it's just deeply involved in their work. These are people that are very, very reflective of their self. They're not looking at the circumstance that they're in. They're not even looking at the opportunity that they're in. They are thinking, well, whatever the opportunity is, I'm going to do well. I'm going to commit to it. And they do it with a vigor. Like that's the word that you used. And I love that. Could you explain that to people today? Because for me personally, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know how you're going to do well without commitment. And people are just running away too prematurely. I loved what you said about social media because people don't even know how to resolve an argument anymore. We just block people and ignore them and
Right.
never face them again. And so how can we reignite that vigor inside of us to stay where we are and go deeper instead of running away?
Good point. So when it comes to commitment, I think what's really important is our values and really understanding our values. We have to know what's important to us, what's really meaningful to us. And once you sort of work that out for yourself, where what's your sort of North Star, what guides you, and you stay on that path, not get distracted by all these other things, in my case, psychology really turned me on, and the ability to translate psychology to larger numbers of people than I was able to do, but seeing one person at a time or teaching in a classroom. That gives me passion. And all of the work I do is related to that, that main value where we take the science of psychology and make it digestible to people in large numbers. And we do that in many areas. So for most people, I help them try and find their passion. What is it that gets them excited? What is it that they really want to do? Some people just take jobs for the money or for the prestige. And as you mentioned, those are short-term kinds of things, returns. But what you want is the big return, and learning about yourself and knowing what's important to you, and working within that uh, helps you do great. Like people I've seen who excel, whether they're athletes or they work in the religious world, they're ministers or work that way. They're dedicated to what they do. They're passionate about what they do, and that makes them work harder and succeed and do better at it.
Yeah, totally. And then when you talk about people with low commitment, because sometimes we can learn about something by looking at the opposite of it. Um, this is where you talk about these people don't really have a meaning to their life. And then you just said flat out like you're bored. And I didn't have time to be bored when I was growing up. Like when I, the other day my children were in the house and they're like, "Mom, I'm bored." And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, you don't always need to be doing something. And sometimes you're so busy that you want to have nothing to do so you can rest and recharge. And like in today's world, are we like so fixated on always being, doing something that we are actually lowering our commitment levels because we're not processing boredom properly. Like, could you explain that on a psychological level, what's happening to people when they can't just do nothing and be okay with that?
Well, I think what we've seen is a fight for our attention. It's sort of the
Yes.
TikTok generation. So we're used to really set, quick sound bites of things. Like, and I see this in my granddaughter who's 9, right? And she gets into her iPad and goes from one thing to another. And it kind of drives me nuts, and I gotta slow her down and say, let's talk, let's get into something in more depth. We can't,
Mm.
their mind is just going from click to click to click, and that's going to influence you, the way you think, the way you look at things. You become more impatient, and you don't take the time to work hard and learn things and excel at something. And I think that's where we've got to really take some direction and influence what our kids are doing. We've got to get them more deeply interested into something. We got to find something that clicks with them, that works with them. I know my grandson is interested in certain things in mechanics and in certain areas, and we talk about those and we go in depth in those, and I give him little tasks to do so he can research and look up things more and get more involved in it. So you want to get them into more longer term tasks, make sure they're the right tasks that they're interested in and they're learnable. They will find things that will help them. So that's what we have to do. We have to move away from, get them off the TikTok, get them off some of those social media, distractions, and get them into things that are more long term and will influence them in a better way.
I think I found your next book, like Hardiness for Kids, and then Raising Hardy Adults, and it starts at childhood. So I think that's like a big thing there. If we move from commitment and we go to control, whenever people hear this word, they get like weirded out by this, and they're like, "Don't control me. I don't want to have control." And I always look at people and say, like, you need controls in your life. Like this is a good thing. And you talk about when people do have control, they have a sense that they can make a difference in their world. And when they don't have control, things are just happening. And in a world where people are just like, I just want freedom, I just want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. I think this is where it gets very messy because you're just going with the wind. You're just doing whatever feels right for you. So if you could explain that to people in terms of how control builds hardiness by making sure that, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all.
Absolutely. And it has to do with focus as well, because things happen to us, right? Bad things happen. And so some of those things, there's something we can do about it, and some of them we really can't. We can't change the situation. when I mentioned the people who got laid off their jobs. You can't change that. I mean, some people tried to, they kept trying to fight it and do things, but that wasn't a good use of their time because they really had no control over that. And it's really understanding what you can control versus what you can't. So you can
When do
control.
you know that you should fight? And when do you know that the control is to fight or the control is to not fight? When do you know?
Well, you got to do a little task analysis on it. Like, what is required? You do your research. What do I need to change that system? Can I do it by myself or do I need the help of others? How much energy, how much time? And you've got to draw a calculation where you say, you know what, I'd be much better off spending my energy and time managing my own emotions and going in a different direction and finding something that I have more control over. Maybe I can train for some other kind of a job or find something else that is more suited to me at this time. So it really is a calculation, and when you have a coach or someone coaches you, you would
Yeah.
work out those kinds of things, right? You would say, you could spend 80% of your day fighting this thing, but it's really not going to. You're trying to move a mountain, and you'd be much better off spending your energy and time over other things where you have more control over. Start with yourself, right? What can you control about yourself? You can control your emotions, your behaviors. You can learn how to focus your emotions and in a different direction and pick up other learnings, other directions that you can go.
Yeah, that's great. And the last one is challenge, for it kind of ties in very nicely with hardiness in terms of people dealing with change as the world is changing and moving faster than we're, used to experiencing. What is the difference between people that can be hardy and adapt to change versus the low challenge people that are just like, I just want to do what has always been done? Like, what would be the outcome of that type of mentality?
Well, today it's getting more and more difficult to not deal with change, right? Especially in organizations because things are changing so fast. It started when we introduced technology, and then technology is taking over. Then AI is taking over. So I think the importance is people who are good with change, who can manage change, will stay on top of what's happening around them, and they don't get overwhelmed by it. They don't get buried by the change. They say, and they what they do is they take a step back and they look at it as a problem to be solved, not as an attack on them personally or something that they have to be fearful of. But the question is, how could I solve this problem? Or how can someone I know who I trust, how would they solve this problem? Someone who is low in challenge tends to get overwhelmed. They either avoid the situation, which isn't helpful in terms of your own self-growth, or they panic, excessive fear, and they get frightened. And again, that's not a helpful response for you, in a number of ways. It's not healthy for you physically, it's not mentally healthy, and it's not going to get you where you want to go in life.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other books that you wrote was talking about the seven keys to an emotionally intelligent organization. And it's talking about making your workplace great. And I think this is really, really important to be addressing. And when we think about work today, what COVID did for us is it trained us to just sit down and stare in front of a computer and like kind of be a zombie all day. And so what that has bred is almost a lack of energy that we're putting into our work. And so when you see people today and they're not engaged as much as they used to be, how much of this is due to like stress from people versus maybe just not the physicalness of like moving around? Like, what is it that we can do when we are working virtually to still have a positive workplace environment, even though we're separated and not really, held in close proximity to other people that we're working with?
Yeah, I thought, that really scared me when COVID hit, and we have 230 employees in our organization. So
Wow.
the thought of all those people being remote was terrifying for me. But we've really managed it. We've gotten on top of it. And we're at a point right now where I think my HR person told me our voluntary turnover rate is 3%. People are not
Wow.
leaving. And what we've done, and that's still being remote, and we track everything, we measure. And one of the things we measure, for example, is teamwork. Like we have 4 quadrants we measure regularly. We measure the work, how satisfied are you with the work? Are you happy with it? We measure how happy are you with the team? Can you speak up and disagree with people and still get along? And then we measure your manager. What do you think of your manager? Are they doing a good job? Are they coaching you? And finally, we measure senior leadership. Do you feel that the people running this organization know what they're doing and they're going in a good direction and so on? One of the things that just blew me away was our team measure was like 90% satisfaction in a
Wow.
totally remote workplace. I mean, that really turned me around when I saw that in terms of where we're going. So what do we do? What do people do when they're remote? You're right, exercise, make sure you stay in shape, stay in touch, be in touch with your team, with your coworkers, know what's expected of you, have very clear goals and expectations, set timelines for doing those goals. Again, it gets back to responsibility that I said we have to go back and teach our kids. When people learn to be responsible, to set goals, set timelines, make sure they contribute to the team what they promised to contribute. When you look after all those factors, you'll be amazed at how well people perform. And leadership is a huge part of this. What you mentioned, which should my next book be? One of the things we've been studying is what is it that leaders have that really engage people, get people doing the right things and making them happy. And when I studied leadership, we looked over the last 120 years, how has leadership changed? Leadership's been an evolution, like everything else. So, 120 years ago, Henry Ford was regarded as, one of the most successful leaders in industry, but he was a very command and control leader. And he was someone who was steadfast, I would call it. And when he was asked to change the color of the Model T Ford from black to anything else, he absolutely refused. And even when the competition was gaining and having multicolor cars, he refused to do it. So that was the kind of leader that you had back then. If you fast forward to the beginning of the microcomputers and you look at someone like Bill Gates, he had a very different leadership style, and he had a similar challenge. When the internet first started up, he ignored it. Microsoft said it's not worth spending money on the internet until a small company named Netscape took off with the internet. And what did Bill Gates say? He didn't say, well, I said we're not doing that, and I'm still not going to do that. No, he totally turned the company around on a dime, and they went after the internet, vigorously. So I call that adaptable. The new leaders became more adaptable. They were able to change and go forward. And then if we go further on, one of the things I predicted about 20 years ago that a big trend would be in business would be social responsibility. And Anita Broderick was the first business person to put social responsibility in her business plan. And she opened up a chain of stores called The Body Shop all over the world,
Oh,
which was
wow.
focused on being socially responsible. So what came next? What came after that? Well, the next sort of change I would see in leadership would be someone like Howard Schultz, who opened Starbucks, because he strongly believed that all his employees should have health insurance. He believed that he would provide continuing education, fund people to go to university. And some of the things that he instituted in that environment are things that we had also been doing. We funded college education for some of our employees. We provide healthcare and so on. And I call this unconditional love, which I think is going to be the next direction of leadership. And it's the leaders who show these qualities that are going to find the better people to work with them, that are going to be more engaged, and that are going to be more productive. So that's how we're going to, cross that hurdle. Remote work is a challenge, but we've been able to overcome that challenge to a large degree by providing what I call this unconditional love, by having people who stay with us, regardless, because they know that we have purpose, that we're committed to what we do. They feel they're making a difference in the world, and we look after them. We look after the main things that we feel that we can look after.
What is your role with standards for your team? Like, how do you organize your people around having healthy standards, or do you just not have that at all? And it's kind of like, let's just create a culture where everyone is welcome.
Well, we do create a culture where everyone's welcome, but we do have standards. We
Yeah.
have certain behaviors that we expect. We have certain KPIs, like things that we expect their group to accomplish by a certain period of time. So everyone knows they're walking in there, they're signing a contract with us, and we have expectations of you, and you have expectations of us. And we're very into authenticity and transparency, and we will live up to our expectations, and we hope you'll live up to your expectations. And as long as we do that, we're going to do well together. We're going to accomplish things. We're going to make more money, which is not the main thing that we see, but we do have a profit share. So people can see what the company's doing and how well we're doing, and they can share in that benefit as well, and see how their contribution fits in.
Mhm. I would like to know your thoughts on the future of business, where we see a lot of, these massive corporations that are just leading from the top, and they're so data driven, and they think like the data is what you have to do and put that down, and data is incredibly important. But then you have different leaders that are leading more of a on a local level, connecting with people. And on the ground, I love this about the military. There's a saying, like, if the map doesn't match the field, you follow the field. Like, what you think is up here, and when you get down here and it's not that, you go and follow the field. And I think that's shifting in business. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are a lot of corporate people that want to make these, cause and correlations at the top, and then run that data and then enforce certain structures down below, but it just doesn't work on the field. And then you
Right.
have people that are saying, like, this isn't working. And corporations now have to start listening to the people a little bit more.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I was one of those people who grew up with management by walking around. And
Yeah.
again, that's one of the other things that drove me crazy about remote work. I would spend part of my day, every day, walking through the office, chatting with people. How's it going? Any problems, any issues, whatever. Or even talk about your family and what's doing. Getting to know everybody was so important. And now we have to change the way we do that. It's not
Yeah.
me who does that necessarily, but we do have management structures where there are people who are looking after everyone in the organization and can stay on top of it, and get to know what are your struggles, what are your challenges, what's happening with you. And we have to shift the organization based on what's going on the ground. Just like you said, if we find that customers are reporting a certain thing happening, we've got to shift if we were going in a different direction and move with that. It's a real difficult balance, especially when the ship is large and
Yeah.
those changes become more challenging. When you have projects that have 20 or 30 people working on a project and you've got to make a change, it affects a lot of people, and you got to make sure that it's the right change.
How would you tell people, like, to balance the shareholder needs versus what's actually happening in a company, so that people are not just going after what they think is creating profit, but understanding, like, the people create the profit, and to make sure that if you put the people first, that your company, like, the money will flow up
Yeah.
organically, instead of it coming like, this is what it is, now push that down and then irritate the people. Like, that's not how you win in business.
No, it's a lot around communication. It's
Yeah.
communication and how you communicate. So at the top, we do set strategy.
Yeah.
This is the area, these are
Huge.
the boundaries, this is what we want to do. And then we filter that down. We have meetings all the way down. We have town halls where everybody's in the room, but then we have department meetings where we talk about this is where we're thinking of going. These are the plans. This is what the direction. How does that fit with you? What do you see out there? And they'll sometimes pull in things from the field that says, you know what? I don't think that's going to work. There's a competitor who tried that and they failed and blah, blah, blah. So we've got to take that feedback, and it's a two-way street. We've got to listen to what's going on the ground, feed that back up, and see how that adjusts our strategy. The tactics get worked out at a lower level, but those tactics have to feed into the strategy. And we're constantly trying to adjust and do that. And, I love being in those meetings. I was just at one last week where we flew everybody in one particular team. This is an area where we work with, we have a new technology for identifying gifted children. And we had everybody in, from the programming people the to the people who are selling on the ground, to the R&D people, and everyone trying to solve these problems from what they're hearing on the ground from teachers and parents who are, who get the results of how their kids are doing, and the effect that it has and how it's being used, all the way up to the top in terms of trying to provide everything they need to make it go smoothly. And it's really great when you hear everybody participating, everybody stating, what their experience is and what has to be done. And I think you need that kind of communication.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're really getting so correct. Like it's when an organization is properly aligned and there's a flow of communication from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom. So it's not just one is more important than the other, but there is a healthy flow. And that ultimately, like that vessel stays open when there's trust. When there's no trust from the top to the bottom, this is when information gets like closed off, and then you're really not dealing with accuracy, and so then that ensues a whole different set of problems.
Well, I have to tell you, I just love it when a young 20-year-old comes in and tells me how I'm really off base when it comes to social media. I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I have them slowly explain to me why I'm wrong and why we should be doing it this other way. I
Yeah.
just have a laugh. I think that's the funniest thing. And one time, one of them challenged me. She didn't know I was like the CEO. She just thought, I just don't know what I'm talking about. And she was laying it out very nicely, telling
Yeah.
me why I've got to, know what's going on and how it works out there. And then
Yeah.
eventually she was so embarrassed when she found out who she was explaining it to.
Yeah. Listen, I have so much respect. And I think one of the things that I always explain to people, you have to honor people that have done the hard work before you. And like these are people like my mentors in my business, they've plugged in 40, 50 years ahead of me. And I walked, on the path that they paved. And I just have so much respect for them. I never want to look at them and say like you don't know what you're doing, but I want to build upon what you've done. And then like there's no substitute for experience and what you can gain over decades of going deep into an industry. So that's an incredible, beautiful thing. I think that we don't celebrate enough. That needs to be brought back. I wanted to like just end everything with talking about uh, you know, for people that are feeling this stress today, that they want to do well at work, they want to have a great personal life, they want to be like super mom, super dad, they want to do it all. How do we manage that for ourselves in terms of showing up, engaging more at work, not engaging less? Engaging more with our kids, not engaging less, being a better parent, not just kind of saying we want to do it all, but just being better at what we do when we're doing it. What are your words of wisdom for a society today of people that are trying to do it all and then we feel like we're doing nothing sometimes?
Yeah, I think really you've got to start with finding out your values and
Yeah.
what's important for you, what stands out as first. I remember one of the things we did was we assessed top lawyers in Canada, looking at their emotional intelligence, and then we looked at different categories. We did corporate lawyers, we did female lawyers, and so on. And I remember when we did the top female lawyers in Canada. I remember one of them who was like pretty much number one or two in the whole country, rated by her peers or by all lawyers. And I asked her that. I wanted to know, you're regarded as one of the top lawyers in the country. Like, how do you juggle it? You got kids, and she had an autistic kid, and she had all these things around her. How do you manage that? And to her, really, and she kind of laughs. She says, I'm considered the top lawyer in my firm, but I don't define myself by my job, my profession. Many of the men who work there, they're defined as lawyers, and it upsets some of them that I do so much better than them, because I see myself more as a mother. That's my first priority, and I'm a lawyer second. And she's able to sort of parcel out her time, her values, and what's important to her. But she was so good at everything she did. And then, I mean, in her spare time, she set up a school for autistic kids because of her kid and was on the board and managing it. So she had all these things going on. But it's a matter of really knowing how to compartmentalize your time, knowing your priorities, and putting that time into the things that are most important for you and most valuable for you. And it was amazing that she did so well, exceeded so well. People who fully defined themselves as, professionals in that area, but they couldn't yet achieve what she achieved, where it wasn't even her top priority.
Isn't
But it
that
was
amazing?
again her ability to focus and compartmentalize. I this is my time with my kids. I put them to bed. I'm back as a lawyer. I'm going to finish the stuff between whatever 8 o'clock and midnight, and then I get up in the morning. I'm doing this and that, taking my kids to school. And she had it all laid out, all compartmentalized. When she took vacations, she was on vacation. Everything
Mhm.
else was shut out. She was with her family. So I think we need some of that ability to really manage our time through our values, through what's important for us.
Yeah, I love that. In closing, I would just like to say thank you for your dedication to just understanding the human element that's required to do well in life, to be successful, and for us to just differentiate ourselves from robots, and to have that emotional connection with people, and to really just think about that word, what it means to actually connect with people, to commit to relationships, to not be afraid of like challenging relationships, because those are often sometimes the best ones that push us to be even better. And I think all of these things, when I think of being hardy, I can't think of, me raising leaders in my children. What I want them to be is to have that spirit of toughness, that you can handle a lot more than you can imagine. And so I love that you're dedicated to this area, because we need this right now. We need people of your level of expertise telling us what it really takes, and then committing ourselves to that process of developing over longer periods of time. So thank you for that. If people want to find out more information from you about your work, if they want to learn like what you're doing in particular, and I do have one last question. How do you test if a child is gifted or not?
Well, we have a new technology. It's a new set of tests, and the
Okay.
main thing about it is that it's primarily nonverbal. So one of the problems we've had with existing gifted tests is kids who come from a background that they don't have as much culture behind them, or their parents don't read to them. They could be quite gifted, but because of their environment, it won't show up on traditional tests because they're so language based. So what we use are a series of I won't call them cartoons, but they're uh, pictorial tests that have been found to pick up more kids than traditional tests who are really gifted in whether it's mathematical, spatial, or verbal. We're able to pick that up through these automated tests that we've been putting in school districts throughout the U.S.
I
It's
love
really,
this.
it's really an exciting area for us.
I'm going to look this up, but where do I go to find out more information about you, about what you're doing? If I want to get involved, where do I go to learn more about you?
Well, my website is stevenstein.com, and this is stuff about what I'm doing. And the gifted and the products that we develop are through mhs.com. Uh, is some descriptions of all the different kinds of tools that we develop.
Okay, great. And then your books are all on Amazon for people to get to read, and then to really just implement. This is stuff that's backed by research. A lot of the stuff in the Hardiness book, it talks about what they do at West Point, which is really, really awesome, so that people can really look at these are real life examples of people applying this and getting phenomenal results with it. So thank you for sharing this information, for being a person that's making yourself available to people that care to live an extraordinary life. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. I have to say, I'm really impressed the fact that you actually read the book and you're so familiar with the information. So you're very impressive to me. I really appreciate that you took that time.
Oh, thank you.